Fresh Perspectives at the Lady Lever Art Gallery is our latest exhibition with local schools. It involves 4 local schools from the Wirral who we've worked with over a number of years. And the idea is to give young people the opportunity to exhibit their fantastic artwork in a national gallery. It's been a partnership really. We've worked with the schools to select the works that the pupils have produced recently. The schools have helped us to choose what they regard as some of the most interesting or best or most adventurous or representative of perhaps what the whole year group has been doing. And walking around the exhibition, you'll see there's many different types of media that each of the schools has used, from painting to doing dry point etchings to doing textile work, and the whole exhibition really demonstrates the fantastic quality of work that the young people are producing in school, but also just how the boundaries are being stretched. You know, they're given the opportunity to explore working with lots of different types of materials. We did Fresh Perspectives 1, let's call it, 2 years ago, again working with 4 schools, and the exhibition was a fantastic success. Many visitors coming to the gallery who wouldn't have expected to see an exhibition like this here were writing comments saying how fantastic the young people's work was, how wonderful it was that a gallery like this gave them the opportunity to see their work in a proper gallery setting, and also what it said about how art is being taught in school and how valuable it is that young people have the chance to practice their creativity and are supported and inspired in doing that. We've been trying to make the gallery much more accessible to a broader range of visitors over the past 10 years or so, and we've done that in different ways by improving the building, by having, we hope, very high quality temporary exhibitions, but also by working much more with schools and community groups to show them that the gallery is a facility for everybody. It can be inspiring. You come along and learn from the collections here, have fun looking at them, thinking about history, about art, about people, and so as part of that whole work, that journey in terms of developing those relationships. And one of the things that in discussions with schools, many schools said to us that they wanted to do is that they wanted their young people to have the opportunity to display art here in the gallery. The exhibition has been made possible through very, very generous sponsorship through the Johnson Foundation, which is a local charity which is very much interested in encouraging and supporting young people. And the Johnson Foundation has supported us previously in developing education and our education programs here at the gallery, and this exhibition is linked to that wonderful support. Visitors said how high quality the work was, how well presented the work was, how interesting it was to see the different range of practices that the students were undertaking. It wasn't just about doing a drawing or doing a painting. There were lots of different art forms shown in the exhibition, and I think that surprised visitors. And we got a number of comments too, which were about how important it was that any government supports creative practice and art in schools and in other institutions, because it means so much for our younger generation.
We thought it was a wonderful opportunity for our students to exhibit their work in such a prestigious venue, and we thought it was also a very fitting tribute for their creativity, a sort of reward really for the creativity and some of the excellence and expertise exhibited in the work. There was a theme in general. We were working on a still life sort of theme and an idea based around evolving form. And it was linked to the genre of vanitas art, which is a religious theme in art, reminding people about their mortality and the transience of life. And the students are quite interested in that because it has links with art from other cultures, such as the Mexican Day of the Dead, which is something that students are quite interested in because of the culture of tattooing and that sort of thing. They quite like the gothic nature of that, and so that was the concept behind the project. I feel very proud, proud of their achievements, and also I think it's really good because it helps to inspire them to see their work exhibited in a gallery such as this, and with work from other students as well. I'm sure it will motivate them to want to improve and get better and better in terms of what they produce in the classroom.
There's work from a few different year groups in the exhibition. There's work from year 8, and we looked at Venice and architecture and the houses in Venice. We've got work from year 9, and we looked at birds, and then they took that into making some fantastical, whimsical type birds in 3D and mixed media, which was really fun to do because they could give them all their own characters, which is great. And we've also got some year 10 work, which is again whimsical creatures. We've got rabbits and mice that they made out of textiles and decorated in their own way to get kind of a woodland style and kind of whimsical fairy tale kind of look to them. And then we've got some work based on natural forms, looking at an artist, Jessica Doyle, and cells and close-up patterns in nature as well. And then we've got work from year 11 students based on cells and close-up and kind of microbiology, disease, looking at colour and form, and lots of experimenting. So yeah, lots of different things from different year groups really. I think they are so fantastic and their work is brilliant. They work so hard. And they deserve to have it seen by not just people in our school. I think they deserve to get it out there to a wider audience. And it looks great, and it's lovely for other people to get to see it, and for them to bring their families along and get to visit the gallery as well. So yeah, very, very proud of them.
I was looking at growth and decay, so I thought I want to produce like a still life picture on a bit of both. So I did a skull with a pot of tulips behind to incorporate both themes.
I thought of taking a bottle and a flower and combining the two, making it look like a flower growing out of a bottle. From that then, I developed my idea.
What we did was we had to create the windows in Venice and the architecture in that kind of area, like the atmosphere of it and the faded away, eroded effect of the paint on the houses. So it was we looked at a lot of pictures on how to draw it and what they really looked like. So yeah, it was a really nice project to do. Personally, I really like art, and I love that kind of effect where you can create your own artwork and for other people to see based on natural things in the world that other people have created. So yeah, I'd really love to do more.
I was mainly inspired by the Oriental art and how it's so decorative and it's all really layered with loads of different things. So with this piece I've used different techniques, like the heat pressing, so that's with inks and transferring, got stenciling, and then I did a whole stitched design, which was heavily influenced by the Indian culture, how it's really floral but in a stylized way. That's really helped me.
We started off by looking at anatomical structures as well as mechanical, and I was inspired by oil paints, and I was really interested in the textures that were created. I decided to merge them all together into a wall so you could see different aspects of the two combined. It's a big accomplishment because I like to show how I can express my art myself, and I like seeing all the others, and it's just a great way to show what I can do.
Yeah, it is a huge step because I never thought my work would be in a place like the Lady Lever, to be honest. I thought it's quite interesting, it's quite exciting to have your work put up.
It's actually quite amazing to be in here actually, especially from walking out of school. Walking past here every day and coming in here sometimes after school, and now seeing my artwork in here is really good.
Well, very proud and surprised that they chose my work, because there's a million other people in the school that artwork could have been chosen. So it's quite surprising as well, yeah.
I think it's really really good to see my work hanging up like that, just because it makes you feel better about yourself and other people looking at your work in like a gallery like this is really inspiring.
This is a painting by David Bomberg, who's a British artist. And I say he's a British artist, but his family actually came from Berlin, and they were a Jewish family, and he was a member of the Jewish community of the East End of London, which was a kind of badge that he wore quite proudly. He also wore his poverty quite proudly as well. Sometimes we might think that art is made up of, you know, rich, elitist, kind of academic people, but Bomberg proudly wore his working class credentials and his Jewish credentials. In 1913 as well, and we all know the Jewish story in the 20th century throughout Europe, and I think he comes into that a bit as well. At this time in his career though, very early on in his career, Bomberg was very interested in what was going on in Britain, but also what was going on abroad. Picasso had a huge influence on the art of the early part of the 20th century, what we call the golden age of modernism, the first few decades of the 20th century. Picasso, we've discussed already, was fragmenting the canvas into different geometrical spaces, different spatial planes, if you want to call it that. And that was having a huge influence, looking at things from different angles, a single painting made up of multiple viewpoints. And huge influence in Italy, it had a huge influence in Russia, with Russian constructivism and Russian suprematism, but also it had a huge influence in Britain as well. There was a group of artists called the Vorticists, and they were called the Vorticists because a lot of their paintings have a kind of vortex, like a kind of central energy. If you think of this painting almost like a kaleidoscope, if you think of other vortexes in your life, like water going down the plug hole, or the solar system with the sun in the middle, they all have this kind of central sort of swirling sort of energy. The movement was started by a man called Wyndham Lewis. And Wyndham Lewis was also very aware of what was happening in Italy, a group of artists called the Futurists. So both the Vorticists and the Futurists were very young, idealistic, very angry people. The Vorticists had a manifesto called Blast, and it was all about blasting the old ideas. Blast this, blast that. What we want is something new. So it was all very youthful, ideological, almost like punk in 1913. The Futurists and the Vorticists as well were also interested in the new age of technology, the new age of machinery, and their paintings often had a kind of mathematical, geometrical grid that kind of reflected. They almost worshipped the machine. The painting in this, on this floor actually by Balla. He's an Italian futurist, and it's a painting of a man, of a landscape by a man who is sitting in a car for the very first time. So it's difficult for us to know what it would have felt like for a grown man to sit in a car for the very first time. So the landscape is whizzing past him. So the sense of movement in a painting is something new. If you think of a Cubist painting being made up of multiple viewpoints, then it's also made up of multiple moments in time. It's not just a single moment in time. We normally think of a painting as being a single moment, like a snapshot. Here we've got movement, we've got different moments in time. Even though it's a still painting, it's about capturing a sense of movement. Now here, David Bomberg, he's interested in all those things, but what you've got here is David Bomberg interested in the human figure as well. Now the title of this painting is Ju-Jitsu, but the title comes later. It was actually based on figures running around in a steam baths in the East End of London. So this mass of arms and legs, this mass of figures, or a mass of figures being treated like as if they're one machine. He's not interested in people as flesh and blood, as emotional things. He's almost treating them as a kind of mechanical sort of moving object. And this frantic sort of busy energy is trying to capture that as well. Also the tile. Of tile. So we've got this merging of the figures and also this abstract coming together. So he was really interested in reflecting the East End Jewish community in which he was living, but was also kind of interested in taking on board all these modernist ideas that were happening at the time. Now this was done in 1913, and it looks still quite like a modern painting today. A lot of people think of it as still quite a modern painting, although it's 102 years old. It's interesting though, 1913, because 1913, of course, is the year before the First World War broke out. And there's almost a sense of innocence, a kind of naive worship of the machine, if you like, before the First World War. It's such a fascinating year in so many ways. Bomberg had this worship of technology, worship of machinery, and also he loved the Vortices to some extent, was never a fully paid up member, but also he began to fall out with a lot of this as well. Eventually, he ends up serving in the First World War. He soon realizes that the machine and the technology is an agent of death and destruction, as well as an agent of progress. He falls out of love with the Vorticists, he falls out of love with the Futurists. Also, there were very questionable attitudes among the Vorticists and the Futurists. Some of the Italian Futurists, for example, end up supporting Mussolini. Ezra Pound, who was a writer and a poet associated with the Vorticist movement, some of his attitudes were actually quite anti-Semitic as well, some quite anti-Jewish. So David Bomberg begins to stand away from this whole scene. He begins to stand away from these rising attitudes, and we know where all that leads later in the 20th century. After the First World War, he becomes a much more traditional painter. He becomes more expressive with the paint. He becomes a lot less geometrical and deliberate in his compositions. He's almost modernism the wrong way around. We normally think of modern artists, like we did, but we spoke about Picasso, starting off traditional, trained in this classical European style, and then questioning their training and becoming more and more experimental as they go older, as the 20th century goes on. Bomberg is almost the opposite. Bomberg starts out painting like this, very modern, very idealistic, very futuristic, and then eventually he starts to do still life paintings of his wife and baby. He becomes more and more expressive with the paint. He starts to do landscape paintings, portrait paintings, still life paintings, whereas here he's kind of completely shunning that as well. So after the First World War, he becomes a much more traditional painter. He starts painting his wife, he starts painting his baby, he starts doing still life painting. He becomes much more expressive with the brush rather than this deliberate, geometrical way of painting. He also begins to travel a lot as well. He's very influential in terms of how Palestine begins to change over the 20th century as well. Originally, Israel, of course, would have had some kind of utopian sort of dream about a Jewish homeland. Originally, there were a lot of socialist ideas about Israel, so Bomberg does travel into that region and paints that region a lot as well, but they're very traditional landscapes, almost religious sort of paintings of that area, you know, that sort of buildings, that sort of architecture of Palestine and what eventually becomes Israel. And of course we know again later now in the 21st century that has lots and lots of various issues as well, and lots of consequences later on. But in the end, I think there was always a sort of naivety before the First World War and before later issues to do with Israel and Palestine as well. There's a sort of ideological naivety to David Bomberg, which I find quite appealing actually. So if this painting is really about figures in a steam bath running together, Ju-Jitsu wasn't really on David Bomberg's mind, but he ended up calling it Ju-Jitsu in the end because he liked this idea of movement, the body coming together as this mass of movement, as a kind of mechanical moving machine. There are other works in this room that were done at different times and different to the Picasso painting that we've discussed already, and I'll show you another work that kind of reflects on this in some way. What we've done here at Tate Liverpool is an idea called constellations, where we've curated various works together in one space, in one constellation of works. Now sometimes those links and influences are very direct, so David Bomberg wouldn't be doing what he's doing if he wasn't aware of Picasso, for example, and the Italian Futurists and other Vorticists. But sometimes works can be linked across time and across space. So Mary Martin here, working in the 1970s, you might think was doing something very different to David Bomberg. But if you look at that David Bomberg painting, you can see that there's a similarity between this work and that work from 1913. Of course, it's chopped up into fragmented geometrical spatial planes. It's as abstract as you want it to be as well. The linear patterns of these mirrored tiles kind of reflect on each other and create an abstract pattern. But also, it's about the world as well. It's about seeing the world from different angles. It reflects the environment it's in from different angles. We might even see you in this being reflected from different angles. Like cubism, like vorticism, and there's also a sense of movement as well, like vorticism and futurism. Like all those things, this work is as abstract as you want it to be. It's full of movement as much as you want it to be. It's as figurative as you want it to be. It can also be a portrait. Whatever environment you put this piece in, of course, it reflects that environment. If this piece was in a grass field somewhere, it would be an entirely different piece. So it's always reflecting on the landscape, or the people, the figure, or the portraits, as well as kind of this abstract geometrical pattern.